A pope sits on trial before the entire Roman clergy. Formal charges are read aloud. A lawyer stands beside him, ready to argue his defense. There's just one small procedural issue. The defendant has been dead for 9 months. This is a real historical event. It happened. There are records. Nobody involved thought this was a bad idea until it was much too late. Let's find out how we got here. Quick context. Because the papacy in the late 800s was nothing like the stable institution you're picturing. Forget quiet succession and peaceful transitions. This was less spiritual leadership and more violent revolving door controlled by whichever noble family currently had the most muscle in Rome. Popes during this period didn't so much retire as get replaced, sometimes by natural causes, sometimes by poison, sometimes by a mob literally dragging them out of the building. The average reign was short, and the transitions were rarely polite. Into this mess steps Pope Formosus, who becomes Pope in 891. He's controversial before he even sits down. He'd previously been excommunicated at one point in his career for political maneuvering, then unexcommunicated, then made Pope anyway. Rome at this point runs almost entirely on grudges with paperwork attached. Formosus spends his papacy tangled up in the messy power struggle between rival noble factions fighting over who gets to control the Holy Roman Empire. He picks a side. That side eventually loses. Formosus dies in 896, presumably assuming that, like most dead popes, he gets to stay dead. He does not get to stay dead. Enter Pope Stephen VI, installed a few months later, backed by the very faction Formosus had spent his papacy opposing. 9 months after Formosus is buried, Stephen orders the body exhumed, dug up, out of the ground. 9 months into decomposition in a basilica, with no modern embalming to slow any of it down. And here's the thing that always gets me about this story. Somebody had to actually do this. Someone had to physically dig up the grave. Someone had to lift the body out. Someone had to dress a 9-month-old corpse in full papal vestments. The robes, the pallium, the whole ceremonial getup, and get it upright enough to be presented in court. This was not a metaphorical trial. This was not, we'll try him in absentia and read a statement. The actual physical body was exhumed, dressed, and seated on a throne in the Lateran Basilica in front of the assembled Roman clergy as though it were simply attending its own hearing. And because even 9th century Rome apparently had some baseline commitment to due process, the corpse was assigned legal representation. A terrified young deacon was given the job of standing beside the body and answering questions on its behalf. Presumably one of the worst career assignments in the history of the clergy. Somewhere in Rome that week, a guy got promoted, and it was this guy. Yeah! The trial begins. Stephen VI stands and shouts accusations directly at the body. Charges include perjury, coveting the papacy while technically ineligible for it under prior political maneuvering, and various other ecclesiastical offenses stemming entirely from the old political rivalry. The corpse, unsurprisingly, does not respond to any of this. The terrified young deacon, tasked with answering for the defendant, does his best. It does not go well. Given that his client is, by this point, 9+ months into decomposition and entirely nonverbal, the defense does not mount what you'd call a compelling case. The corpse is found guilty on every charge. The sentence: Formosus's papal acts are declared null and void, retroactively erasing his entire papacy. His vestments are stripped off. 3 fingers on his right hand, the ones used for blessings, are hacked off, symbolically revoking his authority to have ever performed the office at all. And then the body is thrown into the Tiber River. A dead man, tried, convicted, mutilated, and dumped in a river, all because the guy currently in charge couldn't let a political grudge end at the grave. Here's where it gets stranger. According to several accounts, a monk retrieves Formosus's body from the river shortly afterward. Rumors begin spreading almost immediately that the corpse performed miracles on its way through the water. A detail that, historically speaking, tends to show up whenever public sentiment badly wants a wronged party to be vindicated. And that's exactly what happens. Rather than settling the political score in Stephen's favor, the trial backfires spectacularly, digging up and mutilating a corpse, even a politically inconvenient one, was too far even by 9th century Rome's fairly low bar for acceptable behavior. Public opinion turns hard against Stephen almost immediately. Within months, Stephen VI is overthrown, imprisoned, and strangled to death in his cell. The guy who put a dead man on trial lasted less time after the trial than the corpse had been dead beforehand. In the chaos that follows, later popes formally annul the Cadaver Synod itself, restore Formosus' reputation, and reinstate the validity of his papacy. The whole grotesque spectacle is officially undone. The corpse wins the appeal it was never allowed to properly argue the first time around. The real story here isn't really about Formosus at all. It's about what happens when a man chasing power confuses getting revenge with governing. So that's the Cadaver Synod, a trial nobody needed to hold against a defendant who couldn't defend himself over a grudge that could have simply been left buried. Pun very much intended. Formosus lost the trial. He didn't get much of a say in the matter, being dead. But history, as it tends to, eventually delivered its own verdict. His name was cleared, his papacy restored, his reputation intact. Stephen, meanwhile, lost considerably more than an appeal. Formosus lost the trial. Stephen lost his life. History's verdict: draw. So that happened. And the bad news is that's not even close to the dumbest thing humans have done with power, money, or zero adult supervision. The worst news, I've got centuries of this. So if you want front row seats to humanity repeatedly failing upward, hit subscribe. It's free. Nobody gets exhumed. Smash the like button and send this to one friend who deserves to know a pope was once put on trial 9 months after dying. See you next time.